Welcome to Church History Tuesday, short stories from church history to inspire us today. We're going to continue talking about John Calvin by discussing probably what he's most known for, which is the sovereignty of God. If you were going to ask someone, what is Calvinism, or what is John Calvin known for, chances are they're going to bring up the concept of the sovereignty of God. This idea that God made all that is and so controls all that is, that he actually governs his world. And this sovereignty of God not just extends into creation in general, but also in particular, that God plans what's going to happen, and his plans are not thwarted. And this even comes into the area of salvation, where people are predestined to believe, and that God actually saves. And this idea is what a lot of people would summarize as Calvinism. This idea that God is sovereign not only over this world, but over people's lives and over salvation itself. Well, it's important to remember that John Calvin actually did not think he was discovering anything new when he was putting forth this idea of predestination. The Bible mentions it. Paul teaches it. Calvin would look back to Augustine back in the 5th century, saying this is a church father who really developed these ideas. Luther even was on that spectrum of teaching this, talking about how God is sovereign. But where, as one commentator or historian said, Luther's kind of idea was that the just shall live by faith, that Calvin took as a central tenet that thy will be done, talking about God on earth as in heaven, and really extrapolated and expounded upon that core belief. And so he brought this to the idea that God's will is always done. And that includes who is saved and who is not saved. Now, people have argued about this concept, and there's also a lot of bad representations of it or bad understandings of it, and people kind of approach it as this philosophical issue or an intellectual thing to be discussed and debated on whether it's true or not, and it has its place there. But when we talk about Calvin, we have to remember that when he talked about God's sovereignty, he wasn't just talking about an idea out there or a concept that he saw in the Bible. He actually saw something that gave him great comfort, confidence, and humility. He actually saw it in a very pastoral lenses. When you read him about this, he really put forth predestination as this idea that God is sovereign, and that makes life actually make sense. That God is sovereign, and that actually explains why some are saved and why others are not saved. And if God is sovereign, that's why we are saved by grace alone. And he actually got comfort from this because it's not our doing but God's. He got confidence in this because it actually gave credence for us to live boldly. And actually we can preach the gospel and know that God is active in bringing people to salvation. And there's a humility in this because he recognized it's not about us, but it's about God. And when we think about that, whatever you think about this issue, I think that we can be encouraged to look at the truth of this. That the Bible is fundamentally not about us. The world's not about us. Even salvation is not about us. That the Bible is God's story on how he's bringing his people back. That the world was created by God for God to display his glory and to fulfill his purposes and his plans. And that salvation actually is to bring the ultimate glory to our God, who saves us when we don't deserve to be saved. And that is important to remember, that whatever you believe about predestination or whatever system of theology you want to fall into, that we should trust the Bible and be pushed to understand that salvation is from God from first to last, and that is his story that we find our place in, our meaning in, and we can trust our great and glorious Father because of it. And that God's sovereignty is the truth. That God reigns. And that is a good